The California Shoshone tribes settled in an array of places such as Death Valley and Owens Valley. The border between the two often changes. The California Shoshone traveled from place to place, each time moving somewhere with better crop growing land and resources. But there are only a few places in the desert that provide water. These were mostly found in the foothills of Casco as well as a few other places.
Because they traveled so often, the Shoshone built temporary houses which could be taken apart easily. Their houses were made with a frame of poles in a cone shape drawn together at the top with rawhide thongs or cord, then covered with slabs of bark. The Shoshone also used caves as homes, and in the summer they made houses covered with brush instead of slabs of bark to keep out the sun. The sweat houses that the Shoshone made were big enough for the men to stand in. A fire would be built in the center of the sweat house, which caused the men to sweat. This helped to keep their skin clean.
The Shoshones used pine nuts instead of acorns because there are barely any oak trees in the area that they lived in. The Shoshone stored their food in caves and niches. Seeds from an array of plants were collected by many different tribes in the summer. In the desert, beans from the mesquite plant were pounded to make flat cakes. Fresh green plants were not found often in the desert. One of the plants which could sometimes be found were the clovers. When the Shoshone found clovers, they would boil them to get all the bitter flavor out. Another plant which the Shoshone could find was the prickly pear cactus. They dried the prickly pear in the sun. When it was dry, the Shoshone pulled out all the thorns and kept the prickly pear to eat in the winter. The Shoshone ate mountain goat and antelope, as well as the more common rabbits and ground squirrels, and other small mammals, reptiles, or birds.
The Shoshone men and women wore clothing made of deer and rabbit skins, which they hunted when available. Men wore the deer hide around their hips, and the women wore deerskin dresses. As well as dresses, some women wore woven caps to protect their heads from carrying baskets, which were made of strips of bark or willow. Both men and women wore moccasins, or shoes, made of animal skin or twined sage, bark stuffed with fur or grass. Shoshone men and women pierced their ears so they could wear jewelry. The Shoshone also made necklaces with small beads. Some Shoshone even tattooed their faces with coal.
Shoshone tools come in many shapes and sizes. One is the basket, to carry food. Food was scarce, so they did not waste it. Hunting tools were used as well. A popular hunting tool was the bow and arrow, from juniper wood, and the bowstring from sinew or wild hemp. The California Shoshone's ground contained large amounts of salt, which they could trade with other tribes such as the Tuba or the Yokuts, who lived on the other side of the Sierras. The ceremonies were often held in the Shoshone tribe. One of the festivals was the Mourning Festival, in which they would celebrate the dead from the past year. The Shoshone had much music in their ceremonies.
The Maidu was one of the three groups that spoke similar languages. The other two groups are the Conco northwestern Maidu, Nisan in the southern Maidu. These valleys were about 4,000 feet above sea level. The Maidu placed their village along the edges of valleys because the bottoms were often wet from melting snow.
The Maidu tribe had many communities, which were made up of 3 to 5 villages, with about 7 to 10 houses in each village. There was a main village that had the ceremonial earth lodge. The main village is where the headman lived. The headman was like a chief. The headman's job was to give advice and be the one who would talk to other communities. Different communities had different rights to fishing and hunting.
In the winter, the Maidu lived at least 4 feet underground. The houses were round, also being 20 to 40 feet in diameter. In the summer, the Maidu built cone-shaped houses with tree bark surrounding them as walls.
Since the Maidu lived in the mountains, they mainly ate deer. Sometimes they would hunt alone, but sometimes a group of men would go.
They had hunting dogs to help in the hunt. Deer and elk are more easy to kill, but they also hunted for squirrels, rabbits, geese, ducks, grasshoppers, and crickets.
Before all was eaten, meat was roasted or baked. How they made an oven to make the food is this. They put rocks in a hole and lit a fire. When the rocks start to warm up, the coals were raked out.
The Maidu did not wear much clothes. The clothes the men and women wore were mostly made of deerskin. The men wore deerskin around their hips, and the women wore a double apron. The apron women wore was made of tree bark. In winter, the Maidu wore moccasins on their feet. The moccasins were stuffed with grass made with deerskin with a seam sewed up on the front. Because there was snow, the Maidu wrapped deerskin hides on their legs. There was also hair on the legs. The Maidu tribe also wore robes that were made of deerskin or mountain lion skin. The Maidu wore their hair long. And some men wore a neck cap in ceremonies. The Maidu put feathers on the neck cap. The women wore basic caps that were made of toes. Men and women had different tattoos that were made of bones, charcoal, skin, and pine needles. The Maidu built canoes from burning logs and hollowing out the middle. They also made rafts by getting lots of logs and tying them together. Yellow pine, bear grass, and roots were for making baskets. They weaved all the materials together into a dome, then tied them off. The baskets were colored with burnt charcoal. Some of the more advanced weavers can make baskets that could hold water. The Maidu used many different weapons for hunting. They used nets, bows and arrows, knives, and many more. Arrowheads were made from obsidian, and knives were made from sharpened rocks. The Maidu traded with their neighbors. They traded arrows, deer hides, and several kinds of food.
Clam shells were very vital to the Maidu because they served as money. They sometimes polished and shaped them into beads, which were also important.
They danced for fun and ceremonies. They used a rattle called a wasoso. They also used flutes and whistles to make their music.
"40 to 50 tribes live in the Yokut area with some different languages. One tribe usually has 350 people in it. The elevation is about 2,000 to 4,000 feet. Yokut tribes divided themselves as To'i-Uish west and Nutuish east, and animals represented them. The Yokuts lived in permanent houses. They were framed with side poles and covered with tule mats. As many as 10 families could fit in one large house, but no walls separated the families. In dry places, the floor was dug down a foot or two into the ground. In wet places, the floor was flat and level. Each Yokut village had a sweat house. These houses were dug down into the ground and covered with brush and mud. Only men used them for baths and sleeping. Yokuts put up shade roofs so that they could work outside when it was hot.
The San Joaquin Valley provided a variety of food for the Yokuts. Fishing was done all through the year. Antelope, elk, and deer were killed when they came to the lakes to drink. In the Tule marshes, geese, mud hens, ducks, and other waterfowl animals were caught with snares. The Yokuts' main food supply was the seeds and roots of the tule reeds. In the summer, the Yokuts mostly ate greens and clover. For seasoning the food, they used salt grass.
The Yokut tribe has a variety of clothes. Some of the clothing that the woman wore was a skirt made out of tule reeds. It was cut into two pieces. It had a part in the front that was fringed. It also had a large piece in the very back. They were also made out of marsh grass and rabbit skin.
Most men in the Yokut tribe wore a piece of deer skin around their hips. If they didn't have that, they went without clothes. Some of the people in the tribe wore rabbit skin and mud together to make a robe. They used the robe when it was cold. They sometimes wore deer or elk skin on the bottom of their feet when they went through a rough landscape.
Tule reeds were a very important resource to the Yokuts. They used them to make baskets, cradles, and more. To make the baskets stronger, they wove tule reeds and string together so the baskets could hold water. The Yokuts did not use wood or rocks as much as they used obsidian, which is volcanic glass, or some kind of quartz. For sewing, they sharpened small animal bones to use as needles by rubbing on a smooth rock. As well as rocks, the Yokuts also had weapons, which included bows and arrows, spears, hot stones, and nets. They used the nets for fishing, the bows and arrows were for shooting the animals to use as food, and the spears were for spearing the fish and animals. Lastly, the Yokuts used a canoe-shaped raft that could hold about 6 people. The canoes were made from tule reeds. The Yokuts took these canoes out to fish. To sum it up, the Yokuts used these objects that they found all around them to help them survive in the wilderness.
Yokuts traded with people on the coast. They traded seashells. They also traded mussels. Yokut people had ceremonies with dances held outside. Eagle feathers were used for decoration.
Most Chumash tribes lived on the coast, such as the Barreno. There were also Chumash tribes on the Channel Islands, and many, many names of the tribes of the Chumash are recorded. There were also 6 Chumash languages. Chumash comes from the word used for one of the islands, Mitikumok.
The Chumash arrange their houses in groups. The houses are round, big, and comfortable for the resources they have. Light comes in from a hole in the roof. The beds were in different rooms so they won't see each other. In the floor they make a fire to cook.
Chumash houses were sometimes 50 feet long, and the houses were made in a circle meeting at the top. Only Chumash tribes slept in raised beds. All villages had a sweat house covered in brush and dirt. There was a hatch in the top, and the men got in by a ladder.
The most important food for the Chumash was acorns. They gathered them from oak trees. They also depended on seafood, such as shark, sea bass, halibut, and batono. Abalone was an important food too.
They hunted on land and sea. They caught seals and sea otters with harpoons. Whales are only eaten when washed up. They also caught foxes, deer, ducks, rabbits, and geese. One of the Chumash's favorite foods was soap plant. They ate the bulb after it was roasted. They also used it as soap. They gathered pine nuts, cherries, cattails, berries, and mushrooms.
Women wore aprons of animal skins. The ends were decorated with shells. Men often wore nothing. When cold came, they wore cloaks of animal skins and feathers. Jewelry was made of shell and bone. They also painted their bodies.
Canoes made by the Chumash were constructed from pine wood and from about 12 to 30 feet long. The canoes were admired by Spanish explorers. Only the Chumash who lived on the coast made these canoes. Lots of fine woodworking was done by the Chumash, who made wooden plates, bowls, and boxes. They used whalebone to split the wood, and steatite was used to make skillets and pots. Asphaltum, a tar like cement, was used to attach one object to another object, such as shells to pots.
Chumash were skilled in whinstone and also basket weaving. When they needed a basket watertight, they took ground asphaltum and melted them into the holes of the basket with hot stones. With no stores anywhere, the Chumash made everything from their surroundings. For example, they made drills by sharpening wood and rubbing it between their hands to make it spin through other wooden items. They made fish hooks of bone, carved with shells, and made ropes of yucca.
Chumash were likely the supply source for Southern California for clamshells, discs, used as money. They used pismo clamshells, then broke them into pieces and strung them on strings. The Chumash traded with the Salians and the Yokuts. They gave shells and other sea things. In trade, they got obsidian, salt, cantaloupe, skins, and herbs. Chumash's rock paintings were some of the most interesting. They had some religious function. The sites were away from the village, most likely in sacred spots. They played more games, such as Dodge Rock, when food was easier to get, and had flat areas for dancing and ceremonies. They had no drums, but they had flutes instead.